Welcome back to the Adaptive Athlete Podcast, the place for conversations with adaptive athletes in the CrossFit space and beyond. I'm your host, Matt Hotho. Now, today's episode is going to look a little bit different. For the past year and a half, I've had the privilege of telling stories, your stories, and that's still what this show is. But every once in a while, I'm actually going to step back and just step into the chair myself. Not rants, not hot takes, but the ideas and the conversations that keep coming up when I'm talking with athletes. So there are 3 things that are on my mind today. 2, I'll put on your radar. And the third one, I'm going to spend the rest of this episode talking about. Because last weekend, I helped coordinate the adaptive divisions at the Sea Dog Summer Showdown in Jupiter, Florida. There were 6 athletes, there were 3 different divisions, and there were a handful of decisions that had to be made under pressure. And I came out of it with more clarity about where the sport needs to go than I have had in a long time. So let's get into it. The first thing is a topic that is really important to me that I'll be talking about in later episodes. I've done a reel on it. You've probably seen some of the stuff that I've done in my local community, and that's connecting with local rehab hospitals and OT and PT schools to start sharing our story. You know, I think we know that adaptive fitness is a pretty niche sport. Certainly CrossFit is a niche sport, maybe even misunderstood a little bit. And so when people see adaptive CrossFit, sometimes they bring in all of their misunderstandings about CrossFit into adaptive CrossFit. And so you've got a lot of work to do to help people understand what we do in CrossFit and how it can make a difference in people's lives. Because here's the thing, somewhere in your zip code right now, there's a kid who was born with cerebral palsy. There's me. There's a 5-year-old me. There's a 10-year-old me. And there's their parent, right? Sitting there wondering, what does the future hold for this kid? And you can go talk to that parent, and you can give that parent hope, and you can help that parent see that the future can look a little bit different than maybe what they thought. And that's not saying that there's anything wrong with traditional interventions like physical therapy and surgery and braces and that kind of thing. Those things help me a lot. But what it is saying is that CrossFit can be another thing, a sport that a kid can discover at a younger age that, like we say all the time in the L1, is infinitely scalable. And so it can be approachable for that kid who may not have worked out in a long time, or that parent who may not have ever gone into a gym themselves to see something that their child can do. And there's other kids in your zip code, right? Kids who've had a stroke recently. Kids who found themselves in a wheelchair at a young age. Kids who've had EDS and their parents are really concerned and confused as to what that diagnosis means. And there's a good chance that that parent, you know, if any of you listening are parents, you're probably, if you had a kid with a diagnosis like that, you're doom scrolling, right? You're trying to figure it out. And we can be a resource for that parent to see the 25-year-old, the 35-year-old, the 45-year-old version of their child thriving. I did that about 2 weeks ago. I went to a pediatric rehab event that I connected with. Long story, but I went there and I got to see some kids. A few of them had CP, but one of them that really stood out to me was in a wheelchair. She might even be listening to the show right now, actually. But she was in a wheelchair and she just said to me, look, I really want more. I think I can do more. And I connected her with one of you in the community. And I think that that relationship has taken off and she's seeing the opportunity of what is possible for her in a way that maybe she hadn't seen it before. Because we're the proof, right? We're the, what is that thing that Kevin says? We're trying to prove the doctors wrong. And we're trying to say that, hey, there are really amazing things that we can do. So the challenge, go to your local hospital, maybe find your local pediatric program, find an OT or a PT school around you, and go and talk to them. A few of you have already done this. I know Brandon Mance said he did it. I've talked to a couple other of you who have done that. So again, these things are not suggestions as in the community isn't doing these things. It's an opportunity for us to continue pushing our boundaries and doing more to make a difference and to show, again, like they say at CrossFit, the magic of CrossFit, but for a very different population. Okay, I will be talking about that more in a future episode. Believe it or not, there's more I can say about that. The second one, and this might step on some toes, and if you feel like your toes are being stepped on, just take a step back. Or, Brett, just pull them up on your foot plate, okay? Those shouldn't be on the ground anyway. Same for you, Jed. Okay, classification. Here's the thing. I am not suggesting that anything that is currently being done by WheelWOD should change. What I am suggesting is that we need another organization that's putting on adaptive CrossFit events that is doing it in a para sports style. Something that starts with the International Paralympic Committee code that begins with an underlying health condition, 7 eligible impairments, and then minimum impairment criteria, and ultimately sports classes based off of those minimum impairment criteria. Now, that's a lot of work. Those are a lot of big words. For some of us, those are phrases that you may have just been hearing now for the first time. And that's okay. There's a lot of education to be done in this area of classification. Because when you get into a parasport classification, here's the tough thing. It veers more towards fairness than it does inclusion. But there's actually a way to kind of tease this one out. Paraclimbing, US Paraclimbing, has been doing a really good job with this. In fact, they're going to be at LA 28 this year. They've done all the hard work to create a structure that will allow them to actually take paraclimbing to the Paralympics. One thing that US Paraclimbing has that's really helpful is they have these things called open categories. So for athletes who maybe go to get classified and actually class out, meaning they don't have an eligible impairment or they don't meet a minimum impairment criteria, they can still compete in an open category. That's really helpful in paraclimbing so that when people go to events, they show up at the event, they get classed by classifiers, and if they class out, that doesn't mean their weekend's over. They can still throw down and compete. Something else that's really interesting in paraclimbing that is distinct but actually kind of has crossover to CrossFit is paraclimbing as a sport is somewhat subjective, right? When you route set, when you're creating that route on the wall, that's not fixed, meaning every time you show up to a climbing event, the route is slightly different. Well, paraclimbing has route setting guidelines to help route setters set the routes that are appropriate for those particular divisions. So people will take classes and go to trainings on how to be a better route setter for, let's say, a division with athletes who have impairments in their upper limbs, right? So they might need reaches that are not quite as far as someone who's able-bodied. They might need holds that aren't quite as far away. They might need bigger holds to grab onto with one hand. What would it look like if there was a programming handbook for how you program functional fitness for different sports classes and different impairments, right? Now, I know we make a big deal in CrossFit about it being unknown and unknowable, but my hunch is that if we're actually going to break into a true para version of CrossFit and of functional fitness, in some way it can't quite be unknown and unknowable. We have to have some boundaries on what sports classes are expected to do and what they're expected to train for. And again, that might step on some toes. Mike Egan doesn't have to worry about it, but I know some of us need to put our feet up on our foot plates or, and I'm being serious here, listen. And by that, I mean, listen to the argument, take it seriously, and try and consider where the truth might be there and where the pushback might be, but engage with the argument. Don't just dismiss it because it's something different or something that makes you uncomfortable. So the thing I really wanted to talk about today, we're about 8 minutes in, so you're getting an idea for kind of what is important to me right now in this space. But the thing where a lot of this kind of came together for me, this advocacy thing and this sort of classifying programming thing, was a couple of weekends ago when I was at Sea-Dog, okay? So let me set the scene if you haven't been to the Sea-Dog Summer Showdown. It's in Jupiter, Florida. That's on the east coast of South Florida. It's run by Adam and Kelly Davis out of CrossFit Sea-Dog. And I went and competed last year in 2025. And I think there were 14 or 16 adaptive athletes. We had to have 2 heats. Now this year, there were only 6 athletes. And that's not to say that we didn't show up. But the problem is Sea-Dog had to actually move their date because of Easter being their normal weekend. Come on, Jesus. And then when they moved it to May, the first weekend in May, that was just right up on semis. I mean, Sea-Dog ended Sunday, May 3rd. And then if you're competing in the adaptive semifinals, those start 11 days later. And so for many athletes, it was just like, man, doing 6 workouts in the Florida heat just isn't the right way to kind of ramp down for semis. And it totally makes sense, right? So we had 6 athletes though, and we had 3 categories that Wheelwad would kind of recognize, right? We had seeded 1, and that was Abe. Abe is amazing, by the way. If you guys go to my Instagram and watch my interview with him, his story is really cool. We have Julia Halberstam in upper 2, and then we had Dustin McCallum, Lindsay Moore, Olivia Durr, and Shelby Lawrence all rounding out a neuro-moderate field. Now, if you picked up on that, of those 6 athletes, 3 of the athletes were the only ones in their class. And then we had 3 females. So in the neuromoderate. Now, this could not have actually worked out better for your humble host here, who was trying to coordinate this event. Basically, I reached out to Adam and Kelly and just asked if they needed help. Ended up there on Thursday, ended up helping to set up a lot of the venue, which I didn't mind. I love some good labor, although my CP did not appreciate that a whole lot. But I offered to sort of take the programming that Adam had come up with and make sure that it was communicated with the athletes, that it worked for the athletes, that their judges understood what was needed, that they had the equipment that they needed, and to work through all of those details over the weekend. And there were quite a few things that happened that I want to highlight for you because I think they're growth areas, certainly for myself, and maybe for our sport as well. Because the best experience is an evaluated experience. I know that sounds like I got it from a leadership expert, and I did, but it's true. The best experience is an evaluated experience. So we're going to evaluate this experience together. So we had 6 athletes, like I said, 3 who were in individual divisions where it was just them, and then the 3 girls all together in neuromoderate. So what was really cool is for the 3 who were in their own divisions, they were sort of my guinea pigs in some way. I would say, hey, how does this programming look to you? Is there anything you want to do that's more challenging? For them, it really became an exhibition. It was their opportunity to just push themselves, right? So on one workout, there were deadlifts, and I think Dustin's deadlift weight was going to be 95 pounds. And me, Dustin, and Sam Wapshare have a text thread, and we were egging each other on, or Sam really was egging on Dustin. And so we got Dustin up to 155 on the deadlifts, which really made that workout a great workout for him. Because here's the thing I was kind of working on for Abe, Julia, and Dustin, right? These 3 athletes paid good money to come out to Jupiter, Florida, fly out here, get a place to stay. And the last thing I wanted for them was to hit let's say a 10-minute workout and to have the stimulus be a little too adapted so that they finish a 10-minute workout in 4 minutes. Like, yeah, that probably feels good. But at the end of the day, why not dig in a little bit more and get a little bit more of a push of a stimulus of kind of having to really get that time domain, that higher end of that time cap. So they lifted some heavier weights, did some harder gymnastics, that kind of thing. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And then the other thing that I really got to work on was how to keep a competition fair in an adaptive space when you do have 3 athletes that are working towards a podium in that neuromoderate female division. So a couple of things I want to highlight. First, the advocacy side of things. If you followed on the Instagram page, you probably saw that once every workout started, I grabbed my phone and a gimbal and I went live, and I had a little microphone set. And so I was able to kind of talk and commentate on what the athletes were doing. And the whole time I was doing it, I was trying to picture in my mind's eye that person that just has no clue what CrossFit is about, right? Less of a clue even of what adaptive CrossFit is about. So what are these people's impairments, and how can you describe that quickly and clearly in a way that makes what they're doing make sense? So I started by just introducing the athletes, what division they were in, and then pointing out when they would do something that was different or unique or an adaptation, and trying to articulate that for the viewers who were watching on Instagram. And I thought it worked out pretty well on day 1. And then obviously, as I do on this show, I sprinkled in interviews. But what I saw happening was the ability to have someone at an able-bodied event where adaptives are competing, doing that translation that helps able-bodied people understand what they're seeing, right? I got the floor announcer's cell phone, and before every single adaptive heat, I would text him details about the 6 athletes and how and what they would be doing on this particular workout, so that as he's commentating live for those people watching, he can explain that Julia is going to be strapping herself to this barbell because she can't grip that barbell if she's going to do a complex, right? She's got to use grip aids to help with that. Same when she was doing bar muscle ups, that she's going to be using a strict bar muscle up because she can't kip on that bar and kip into a bar muscle up. She has to do a strict bar muscle up and then get down safely off of that. So it was interesting to be able to talk about all those things and let the floor announcer really shine and being able to translate that for the people watching. You may have noticed on day 2, I grabbed my mics and I went out and I was actually talking to people in the audience, the able-bodied people in the audience, getting their reactions while watching adaptive athletes do things like a heavy complex. I think some of this is instructive for what is possible in our sport. Okay. If at any point you hear something that sounds like I'm saying, oh man, the current system isn't working and we need something new, that's not what I'm saying here. Do I think that the current system needs some work? Of course, every system needs work. And I'd be happy to have a conversation about that, but that's probably better off being a private conversation right now than one that just puts people on blast on a podcast, right? But I do think that there are opportunities for more adaptive programming to happen in the US. The European audience does a really good job of this. You got Wadaptive, you got Adapt Aeon, you've got Battle for Middle Ground. I'm thinking about all these events that are coming out, Wadsalona, where they get adaptive heats running at these adaptive events or at these able-bodied events. But in the US, it's pretty limited. I mean, I know there's some, but Sea Dog's the biggest. I think the second biggest might be Wadapalooza, but I think as many of us have experienced, the cost of Wadapalooza is quite extensive going down to Miami. And it is a lot going on there where it's really hard for the adaptives to get featured in some ways. It's hard to kind of get your story to break through when there's so much going on there. There's elites there. There's just a lot happening at Wadapalooza. But I think that something like Sea Dog could be illustrative for what's possible in the adaptive space. Think about a big regional competition that happens in your community, right? So like we also have the ACC, the Atlantic Coast Classic here in Daytona that's coming up soon. But even Sea Dog itself was, I think, 9 heats of 9 teams. So about 162 able-bodied athletes, and then 6 adaptives, or in years past, 14 to 16 adaptives. So we're really not looking at like massive events like Wadapalooza. We're really looking at more like mid-tier events, right? Imagine more of these mid-tier events, meeting with event organizers and saying, hey, can we just get one heat of adaptive athletes? We'll have an adaptive liaison come out that'll help organize equipment, work all this out with your judging team, all that kind of stuff. But we just want a heat of adaptives at the end of every workout. And I'll explain that. If you go at the end, if you have your adaptives go at the end, then they're not slowing down the schedule for the event. Because if we're honest, getting needs for mixed division of adaptive athletes kind of sorted out on the floor does take a minute longer than just changing out some barbells for able-bodied scaled versus RX. It takes a little bit more time to do that transition. So if we put them at the end of each heat for a workout, it kind of gives them just an extra 5 to 10 minutes to kind of make sure we get that dialed in. But we use the floor announcer, we use our own advocacy to go and encourage people to come watch us compete in that heat, right? Julia was doing a fantastic job of this at Sea Dog. People kept showing up to cheer her on. We were going around and meeting other able-bodied athletes and saying, hey, come on out, watch our heats. And people started just coming out to check it out. So that's that advocacy piece happening in real time, helping people see what's possible in adaptive fitness. Today's episode is supported by Equip Products. If you've listened to one of our episodes with a seated athlete, you might find yourself wondering, how do they do double unders? Well, Equip's multi-ropes are the answer, designed specifically for seated and adaptive athletes to get the same stimulus as any other athlete in the gym. No modifications that feel like workarounds, just real training. Head to equipproducts.com to check out the full lineup and find what works for you. So there's 2 other moments that I want to highlight from Sea Dog, and both of them gave me empathy for the work that Kevin, Shannon, and the whole WheelWad team do in programming and making some micro decisions during competition, okay? So the first one was a workout that came up on day 1. It was the final workout of day 1. And it was a chipper. It had 25 cals on the Echo Bike. I'm going to read the neuro version of it. It had 25 cals on the Echo Bike, 20 wall ball shots, 15 hang power cleans, 10 goblet squats, and then 10 pull-ups. And as we were talking about this workout, someone suggested to me, hey, maybe we should change those pull-ups to ring rows. Maybe we should kind of change the pull-ups to ring rows so that, every athlete can do them and no one is standing around, unable to complete a task. And I thought about that for a good bit because, I think we've had those situations at the CrossFit Games where people are unable to do a movement and spectators are spectating and the athletes are standing around. And that doesn't feel good for the athletes. That's confusing for the spectators. So I thought, oh no, if this happens here, what does that mean? But then I realized that actually, from what I'd seen on Instagram, I knew that 2 of the females had pull-ups, and I didn't know about the third, but that was only because I didn't know her as well. And I realized in that moment that if I change those to ring rows, not only is that a last-minute decision, which I'll save last-minute decisions for the second example, but it would have taken away the possibility for those 2 athletes to show that skill in that moment. Now, the other thing I thought about was the programming itself, right? These pull-ups came at the end of the workout. So it's not like it's opening the gate with 10 pull-ups and one athlete is just going to be standing there, unable to even progress in the workout, right? This was at the end of something that was accessible for all of the athletes. So I go back to that idea of route setting in paraclimbing. What if there were ways to think about how we do adaptive programming so that we put the harder movements towards the end, especially for live competition, so that spectators weren't just watching athletes stand around and athletes weren't just standing around, not being able to do a movement at the start of their workout. So what we did is we kept it as is. The workout went okay. And actually, no athletes stood around because I told the athlete who came up to me and said that she couldn't do pull-ups, I said, why don't we do this? It's the last movement of the workout. You look at your judge and you say, hey, I need you to end my workout right here after these goblet squats. I'm going to do 10 jumping pull-ups. I'm going to go sit down. And she was fine with that. She didn't have to stand around and have, people wondering why she's just hanging from the bar. She also wasn't just hanging from the bar being unsafe and possibly slipping and falling. She did her jumping pull-ups and then she sat down. And she had a great workout. She enjoyed it quite a bit. But that was that whole thing too about athlete relationship, right? I was doing, and again, it's only 6 athletes, but I was doing the work of making sure that I had communicated with the athletes, not telling them necessarily that I cared what skills they had so that I could make modifications for those skills, but more so saying, no, here's what the expectation is going to be, but let's find a way that you can still have a good experience so that you're not just standing around. That ability of her to do the 10 jumping pull-ups and then sit down and still be safe. And for the other 2 athletes, because this was a competition rig where typically pull-up bars are about 8 feet in the air, I said, hey, we're not doing this thing to failure today, okay, ladies? Nobody's flying off the bar. We are going to be smart about braking before our grip lets go. Okay, the second example where I definitely made a mistake that I should have caught earlier, I'm going to share with y'all, and that is that on day 2, it opened with a complex, okay? And I completely missed this. Here's what I missed. The complex for the neuro athletes was a snatch grip deadlift, a hang power snatch, a full squat snatch, an overhead squat, 2 back squats, and a behind the neck jerk. Now, I kind of went to bed Saturday night and I was like, I don't think this is going to work. Like, I don't even know if I could do that workout with an empty barbell to the standard. I could probably do it with an empty barbell to the standard, but I don't think I could add a ton of load to that and maintain the movement integrity, right? That full squat snatch being below parallel, that overhead squat being below parallel. I don't know if I could do that, let alone could I do that in balance on a tight floor and maybe wobble or drop a bar or bail a bar. So in this situation, I thought quite a bit about safety. And I was thinking about making sure that adaptive athletes looked like athletes out there on the floor. I didn't want people in that moment seeing adaptive athletes doing a movement not to standard. I'd rather them doing something that's called a power snatch and actually doing it from the power position or hitting it in the power position rather than, oh my gosh, look at that person doing a squat snatch when it's clear they are not squatting below parallel. Okay. So we modified the movement, the complex for the neuros to be a snatch grip deadlift, 2 power snatches, and a hang power snatch. Something really grippy, really fun that kind of focuses on you being able to go from that hang position back down to the ground, reset, and then go back into a power snatch twice, and then bringing it down to the hang and doing one final power snatch. It ended up being a really fun workout. But when I briefed the athletes on this change, as soon as I could on Sunday, I had a group thread with everybody, and I texted these athletes and told them on Sunday, it threw a couple of them off. What do you mean? I'd practiced this. I had this one figured out. Why did you have to change it? And instead of getting defensive, I just said, it's a change that had to be made, and I'm so sorry. I realize you put a lot of work in on practicing this complex, on learning it, because we received this programming, about a month earlier. But we got to make this change, and I'm so sorry. And that's what I said. And I gave them as much heads up as I could. We went into the workout. It went pretty well, and I'm happy with the change I made. And here was my learning. Here's my takeaway. Here was the mistake that I made. When I saw that this programming came out a month ago, I hadn't reached out to Adam yet about being the adaptive liaison, but I saw that complex for neuros, and I went, that's pretty, I don't know about that one. That's tough. What I should have done in that moment is probably started thinking about it. And then when I signed on to be the adaptive liaison, I should have reviewed all the programming. And I should have talked with Adam and really probably identified this particular issue with this complex. Because here's the thing, right? If we're going to offer to be the person helping with these events, we have to take it seriously. We've got to really dive into the programming, and we've got to understand what is possible for different divisions and then make changes as needed. And we don't have to do that in isolation either, by the way. We can always bring in conversations with friends, with other athletes that are in these divisions, that kind of thing. It doesn't have to affect the integrity of the test either, right? At this competition, I had Dustin, who I was actually rooming with, and he was in a division by himself. So I ran this complex by him a couple of times. It was kind of like, I think this is the way to go. I think this prevents people from having to change their grip in the middle of a complex. I think it still tests the general idea of being able to do a lot of snatches and a lot of snatch grippy things while maintaining your grip throughout the complex. For these neuro athletes, though, that requirement to squat, especially in an overhead position, multiple times under load to a standard just wasn't going to happen. And so we had to remove that from the programming, but I should have caught it earlier. Okay, one final thing from Sea-Dog that really stood out to me was equipment. So Abe, love him, came to the competition not realizing that he needed to bring his multi-ropes with him. I should have been communicating with Abe ahead of time to make sure that he knew what was required for him to bring to the competition. Kind of similar to how WheelWOD just put out the equipment for semis a couple of days ago. That's helpful to have that equipment ahead of time. But as much clarity as you can give, the better when you're working with adaptive athletes. And this is not me talking to WheelWOD. This is me talking to Matt. This is Matt debriefing what he experienced at Sea-Dog, where I was the leader, right? I was the one responsible in some ways for making sure that these adaptive athletes had what they needed throughout this competition. Because here's another leadership little nugget that I live by sometimes, is clarity is kindness. And the more that you can give somebody clarity, the more you set them up for success. So when it comes to equipment, I could have given Abe a whole lot more clarity about what was needed and helped him just do better and have a better experience at the event. Now, as it was, he was the only seated athlete. We had a ton of time to help him figure out what he needed. He learned a lot about what equipment he needs. He's probably already put an order into Equip Products for a lap mat, friend of the show. And so hopefully when Abe comes back, he'll have everything that he needs to make this work. So that's my wrap up of Sea-Dog Summer Showdown. I think as you saw from this episode, there's a lot of things that I am interested in this space, right? Advocacy, figuring out the classification thing to be truly para. And again, that's not saying that we have to undo what WheelWOD's done. I'm saying that there needs to be a separate organization that's trying to get that sorted out and providing opportunities for that. And then my review of Sea-Dog and what I took away from that adaptive competition. So if there was anything in this that stood out to you that you want to talk more about, or maybe you want me to dive into more, DM me on Instagram at the Adaptive Athlete Pod, and we can talk more about it there. Real quick, a big thanks to Adam and Kelly for putting on Sea-Dog. It was a great event. The amount of work that goes into a CrossFit competition, I did not have an appreciation for. Cowboy Dave and I were there, actually. I got there Thursday, started helping to build the floor. I did not build the rig, but I got to see the guys build the rig, and that was wild. I've never seen a rig go together. So I had so much more appreciation for the work that Cowboy Dave and his team did all throughout the first 10 days of setting up for Vegas, and then getting behind the scenes, kind of briefing the athletes and reading the programming, but reading the programming not through the lens of a competitor, but through the lens of a liaison, through the lens of someone who's trying to make sure that these athletes have a good competition. I got a much deeper appreciation for the work that Kevin and Shannon do at every adaptive CrossFit Games to help us translate what they have created to help us have a good competition. So thanks to the athletes who showed up, who made this weekend so much fun. If you want to follow all that stuff that we did at Sea-Dog, it's all in Reels on my Instagram page. You can see bits and pieces of every single workout that they did with commentary from the community, from Adam, from Dave. We have interviews. It was just a ton of fun. So if you're an adaptive athlete competing in semis this weekend, get your equipment list locked in. Make sure you have everything you need. Multi-rope if you're a seated athlete, mono rope if you're an upper 1 point, or maybe a neuro athlete, your jump rope. Make sure you got everything you need. Make sure you got that Echo bike ready to go. And if that first part of the conversation about advocacy stood out to you, go reach out to a local hospital or a local PT or OT program around you and see if you can share your story. I guarantee you they're looking for someone to come speak to their community. And if the second thing I talked about, classification, interests you, go read the IPC classification code. Go look up the IPC classification code. A new version just came out last year. You can learn kind of how this model works. For some of us, it will feel exclusive because we don't fit into it. I can't say we there because I do, because you won't fit into it. But that doesn't mean it's not worth reading and understanding, because it's important for understanding what that type of sport looks like, because there are opportunities to do that type of sport and still add open categories around it where you can still participate and be a part of the whole community. So if this episode hit for you, give it a share, give it a like, leave a review. Give me your thoughts, your agreements, your pushbacks, maybe some stories of your own. Shoot me a DM. This is a new way to kind of have some conversations here, not just telling stories of other athletes, but just my own thoughts and experiences in this space. So subscribe, leave a review, send this to someone who needs to hear it. I'm Matt Hotho, and I'll see you next time.